40 shipping vessels have passed through since March 1st. Around 1,000 vessels are currently in the Gulf and surrounding waters. Around half of them are oil and gas tankers. Union leaders are also saying that seafarers have the right to refuse to sail in Gulf waters due to the danger. Seb Kennedy is a global gas and LNG analyst, and he joins us from Perez Zeledon in Costa Rica. Thank you very much for joining us. I wonder if you would say 6 days in that we're in uncharted territory here when it comes to how this is affecting the energy industry worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. It has the potential to be an unprecedented energy shock to the global economy. Everything really depends on how long shipments through the Strait of Hormuz are disrupted and inhibited. Currently, the market's actually been able to absorb the hits relatively well. We have seen a spike in prices, but if you take Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the impact upon energy markets as your benchmark, then we are still a long way away from the extreme price movements that we saw then in 2022. However, there is huge uncertainty about how long Qatari LNG exports are going to be shut in. And if that proceeds for several months, which is entirely possible, we don't have any certainty, then we could see the impact upon prices exceeding what we saw in 2022.
And especially is that because so much of the world, particularly Asia, and the millions and millions of people there rely on LNG from this area for their energy needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Asia is the Asian countries are the major recipients of Qatari LNG. About 80% of Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports head to Asia, but the market's already assuming that the shortfall, the unmet demand from Asia is going to spill over into the spot market. When that happens, then you will see the entire global gas balance tighten. And as a result, we're seeing the traded price of gas in Europe spiking with it, actually above the price of the spot price of LNG in Asia, because Europe needs to import LNG, is immensely dependent upon LNG to restock its depleted natural gas reserves. And we're coming up to the restocking season now. So there's a big question mark over whether Europe is going to be able to refill its underground gas storages while it's competing with LNG in Asia, which is drawing volumes out of a kind of already very tight global balance.
And if this is prolonged, where are people going to get more LNG? Who steps up?
There's not a lot of spare capacity in the system. There is a big project called Golden Pass, which is coming on stream in the United States later this year. That is actually partly owned by Qatar Energy and ExxonMobil. So those volumes will come at a very opportune moment. But there is simply no way for the LNG market to replace a loss of 20% of supply volumes from Qatar overnight. There's just not enough spare capacity in the system. So we're going to see prices rising and rising and rising until they get to a point where it triggers demand destruction and people stop buying LNG because it's simply too expensive. What that means is things like fertilizer plants that use gas as feedstock, they shut down. Energy intensive industries shut down. In Europe, I would expect at some point to see coal replacing natural gas in the merit order of the power stack. So more coal power, less gas power, because coal will become relatively cheaper. And there will be other measures of demand destruction, like if people have gas boilers, turning them down. Although thankfully we're heading into warmer months in the Northern Hemisphere, so that will ease the burden, if you like.
Well, I wonder, Seb, how do these prices regulate themselves? Because today, if you take, for instance, the sort of shock prices at the gas pump, maybe with the price of oil rising, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright says that he expects that the spike in those gas prices would definitely be temporary. But we know that even though when the price of oil goes up, the price of gas goes up, when the price of oil goes down, the price at the gas pump doesn't necessarily fall exactly along with it. So how does this regulate itself? And how long does that take?
Right. Well, you're talking about crude oil and gasoline, and you're right. It kind of shoots up like a rocket and falls like a feather. And I think you could arguably say that that also happens in natural gas. The complicating factor is that there are so many uses for gas: power generation, industrial feedstock, heating for space heating for homes and businesses. That it's hard to say that exactly how long it takes for those end use prices to change, because every sector of the economy behaves differently. But let's just imagine, right, that we have a very tight natural gas market on a global basis. You've removed 20% of the supply. Imagine that Europe kind of delays the restocking of its underground storages in order to kind of help balance the market, and we see some demand destruction with coal coming to the power generation stack. Well, what happens next winter? Because if the way to balance the market is for Europe to kind of forego the refilling of its storages, then by the time we come to next winter, there won't be enough gas in storage. So I would expect to see much higher prices for natural gas next winter, which will kind of prolong this kind of elevated price scenario for natural gas markets well into, I'd say, the fourth quarter of this year and possibly even into early next year, even if we see a kind of relatively quick solution and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz within, a month or two. Then you're still going to see onward impacts going on months into the future.
Zeb Kennedy, thank you very much for your time today. U.S. President Donald Trump says he would support Kurdish fighters launching an offensive in Iran, quote, if they want to do that. The comment came after a site belonging to an Iranian Kurdish opposition group was targeted in northern Iraq. The Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan advocates self-determination for the Kurdish minority. A drone struck the group's building in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region. No injuries have been reported. U.S. media say Washington has been in contact with Kurdish groups in Iran and Iraq. Yerevan Saeed is a Barzani Scholar in Residence at American University's Schools of International Service. He's also the director of the Global Kurdish Initiative for Peace. He says it would be extremely risky for Kurdish groups to take any action in Iran right now.
Kurds in Iran, but also for the Iraqi Kurdistan as well, because these Iranian opposition groups have been based on the border with Iran inside Iraqi Kurdistan. So if this is not going to go in the right way, I think it's going to have blowback not just for them, but also for the entire Kurdish population across the Middle East. I highly doubt that the Kurdish insurgents groups are going to do anything unless there will be some sort of a guarantee by the United States and Israel that they would be protected, because it's not something they can just do it by themselves. And if they are going to do anything that lacks or devoid of the American sustained support after what, for example, if there would be some sort of an uprising in the Kurdish dominated areas in Iran would be controlled by these groups, they would not have any chance, for example, if there would be a counterattack by the Iranian government, unless there will be U.S. protection. And this really comes in a very interesting time, because just 6 weeks ago, the Trump administration obviously said that the Kurdish-American partnership somehow has expired because ISIS threat is not there. So I think they will be very careful. They will really think about this because the stakes are very, very high.
And a reminder that you can get updates 24 hours a day on our website at aljazeera.com. There are live updates, including from our correspondents across the region. Hello, it's 23 GMT. I'm Riley Carlson, and you're watching Al Jazeera's coverage of the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. In the last few hours, Iran has launched a barrage of missiles into Israel, including Tel Aviv, West Jerusalem, and the occupied West Bank. Explosions have caused significant damage to buildings in Tel Aviv, with debris scattered across the streets and emergency crews responding to multiple incidents. At least 11 people have been killed across Israel since Saturday. Earlier, more strikes were reported in eastern Tehran after Israel warned it would target the area. State media say more than 1,200 people have been killed in strikes across the country since the U.S. and Israel began their assault on Saturday. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke to U.S. media, saying he's not worried about an American invasion.
They came here for a regime change, perhaps. They came here for a rapid victory so they can, control everything. But they have failed. The system is working. The commanders have been replaced, and the supreme leader is going to be replaced.
Are you afraid of a U.S. invasion in your country?
No, we are waiting for them.
You are waiting for the U.S. military to invade, the ground troops?
Yes, because we are confident that we can confront them, and that would be a big disaster for them.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump says he aims to take unprecedented action against Iran. He insists Washington will help decide who leads the country next, vowing that whoever leads Iran will not threaten the U.S. or its neighbors. And speaking alongside the head of U.S. Central Command, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the offensive against Iran would only intensify.
You and your team have delivered nothing short of devastating, precise strikes, taking out the better part of Iran's navy, making it combat ineffective, neutralizing missile sites and launchers, and establishing total dominance over the skies we fly over and seas we fly over. Our forces are executing with unmatched skill, and the mission is advancing decisively. This is the kind of no-nonsense, results-driven warfighting that America demands. If you think you've seen something, just wait. The amount of combat power that's still flowing, that's still coming, that will be able to project over Iran is a multiples of what it currently is right now when you add up our capabilities and those of the Israeli Defense Forces.
The Israeli military has stepped up airstrikes across Lebanon, including the capital Beirut, saying it is targeting Hezbollah positions. Hundreds of thousands of people have been on the move after Israel issued more forced displacement orders for areas in Beirut's southern suburbs and elsewhere in the country. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has been escalating since the killing of Iran's supreme leader. And Iran has fired a series of missiles and drones at the United Arab Emirates. Interceptor missiles have been seen in the skies above Abu Dhabi. And in nearby Bahrain, smoke rose from an oil refinery after an apparent Iranian strike. We are live in Washington, D.C., Doha, Beirut, Tehran, and Amman. First, let's go to Rory Challens in the Jordanian capital. He is keeping an eye on developments in Israel. Rory, what more have you been able to learn about these strikes that are happening inside Israel tonight?
Thursday into Friday has been a pretty intense period of Iranian attacks on Israel as Iran keeps up its retaliation for the death of Khamenei and the US and Israeli attacks on wide raid territory in Iran itself. Now, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, says that it launched Wave 21 of Operation True Promise, which is its retaliation campaign. Now, that was a combined drone and missile strike package, which it said included the Khaybar Shikan missile with a cluster warhead. Now, sirens have been sounding across Tel Aviv. There has been fairly widespread damage in central Israel, including fires being started in Tel Aviv. But the ambulance service says no injuries have been reported. And the most recent development is that the Home Command has basically said that some of the areas that have been told that they had to shelter, they can now come out of their shelters and go back to their homes. Now, the Khaybar Shikan missile is actually a pretty sophisticated missile, one of the most recent additions to Iran's arsenal. It's a medium-range ballistic missile, and when it comes back into its sort of terminal descent, the warhead is maneuverable, and as it's coming down, it basically opens up and it spreads about 20 sub-munitions over an area of about 8 kilometers squared. Each of those sub-munitions has about 2.5 kilograms worth of explosives in it, so it can cause a pretty serious amount of devastation. The the use of cluster munitions, of course, is banned by many countries under a convention that prohibits their use. Israel and Iran, though, have not signed up to that convention. And this is not the first time that Iran has been using these cluster munitions against Israel in this conflict so far.
Tauhid Asadi is live for us in Tehran. And Tauhid, while Iran has been launching those strikes against Israel, there have also been a number of incoming strikes on Iran throughout the day. What can you tell us the latest from what's happening in the capital? All right, we will come back to Tauhid in just a moment, but John Hendren is standing by for us in Washington, D.C. And John, we heard a number of updates today from the U.S. administration. We heard from the president. We heard from the Secretary of Defense. We heard from the leader of CENTCOM. What can you tell us about how they're seeing this military operation move into its second phase?
Well, the president from the White House described an enemy that was all but defeated, depleted, suppressed in the skies, suppressed on land, suppressed in the waters. And he said that that Iranians were actually so diminished that he had been given calls saying, do you want to make a deal? And he said, you're a bit too late there. And then after that, Pete Hegseth speaking, this is the Secretary of Defense speaking from Tampa, Florida at the U.S. Central Command, described a military that was ramping up, not down. He said, we've only just begun to fight, and if you think you've seen something, just wait. And then you had the admiral who leads the Central Command, Brad Cooper, talk about operations that had hit 200 targets, bombing targets over the last 24 hours. He said there was a ship that was carrying drones that was on fire as he spoke from a strike in recent hours. He talked about B-2 bombing strikes within the past hour. And in the end, Hegseth ended with a warning saying the firepower over Iran and Tehran is about to surge. Now, that all has to be taken in context with the comments by President Trump, who has long said this would last weeks. He's talked in terms of 4 or 5 weeks. Other generals, others who are in the military have said 3, maybe 8 weeks. But in any case, they're talking about a short engagement with Iranian forces. That would suggest no boots on the ground. And you heard earlier that some Iranians are expecting the U.S. to do just that. But Donald Trump has never really believed in putting boots on the ground for long periods of time. He knows that often leads to unpopular wars like those recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the suggestion here is that the U.S. seems to be content to carry out this war from the air, and they expect it to be short overall, but still just ramping up. Although they say they've hit an overwhelming number of targets, that there are still munitions there on the ground that can strike out and have struck out at 12 different countries in the Middle East. And so the U.S. is trying very hard to close down Iranian capabilities.
John Hendren, thank you. Let's go back to Tauhid, who's live for us in Tehran. And Tauhid, I hope you can hear me now. John was mentioning how the Secretary of Defense, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, said that the strikes over Tehran are about to surge. And that has to be difficult news for people to hear there after the barrage of incoming strikes that they've been dealing with over the past few days.
All right, just the truth of the matter, the reality on the ground is that over the past few hours, we have witnessed an intensified wave of American and Israeli strikes, leaving a growing concern when it comes to the fatalities. On the latest, I can say that according to the statistics that we have, more than 1,200 people have killed, among which the spokesperson for the City Council of Iranian capital Tehran came out to say that at least over 600 people have lost their lives here in the Iranian capital. And of course, the massive sounds of explosion are being heard across the city from time to time. And we know that that doesn't stop there, as we are constantly receiving reports from other cities in different parts of Iran about these continued wave of strikes. And of course, speaking of the Iranian response, we know that they are talking about the 21st wave of their strikes, saying that they have targeted using hypersonic missiles the heart of Tel Aviv. Also, they have said that more than 600 missiles and over 2,000 drones have been used so far to conduct these retaliatory strikes against the Israelis. But speaking of the casualties, and more importantly, the civilian casualties, we know that there are also growing concerns about the escalation and the increase in this regards. The latest instance coming from the past 24 hours include actually Azadi Stadium in Tehran, which was targeted, as well as a highway service complex in Qazvin-Zanjan highway, which was targeted, leaving more than 30 people killed as a result of these strikes. All in all, what I can say is that based on the statements that we hear from both sides, there is no sign of de-escalation. The American side is saying that we are in it to win it, and the Iranian side is saying that it's going to continue the round of retaliatory strikes as long as these strikes are going on. And also, we have to keep in mind that the reddest red lines from Iran's perspective have been passed, so they don't see any possibility of de-escalation at this point, as the foreign minister came out to say that right now they are not going to accept any offer for ceasefire.
Let's move now to Beirut, where Heidi Pett is live for us this evening. Heidi, there have also been strikes. We were talking with Tawhid about the strikes that have been happening in Tehran, but there have also been strikes where you are in Beirut throughout the evening.
Yeah, the southern suburbs of Beirut, which are visible just behind me with smoke still hanging over them, have been subject to several airstrikes in the last hour. You could hear the warplanes roaring overhead, and that is because Israel has issued this wide-scale forced evacuation order for the whole of Dahia, which is these number of suburbs that make up this area in southern Beirut. Hundreds of thousands of people were on the move earlier this afternoon. Traffic in the capital was at a complete standstill as people were trying to get out basically any way they could. And the threat to these suburbs, you know, they've been extensively bombed in the last couple of days, but also during the war at the end of 2024 between Israel and Hezbollah. But the threat this time, or certainly the escalatory language from Israel, is huge. The far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said earlier today that the Dahia would become like Khan Yunis in Gaza. So that gives you some indication of the level of destruction that we may see on the southern suburbs of Beirut either tonight or in the next few hours. But of course, it's not just Beirut where we're seeing these Israeli strikes or these forced evacuation orders. We've also seen airstrikes in the Bekaa Valley earlier this evening and across South Lebanon, where everybody who lives south of the Litani River has been told to vacate their homes immediately. So across the country, people are seeking shelter. Every single shelter in Beirut was full. They've recently announced in the last couple of hours that they're going to open the stadium to displaced families, but others are heading to the north, they're heading to the mountains, into towns and villages, looking for some kind of shelter. But the problem here in Lebanon is that these Israeli airstrikes are following people as they flee, and it risks inciting further sectarian tension here, because the people who are fleeing are largely Shia, who live in the south of the country and in the Dahia, and they have traditionally been Hezbollah's support base. And as they flee to areas that are more likely to be home to Christians, Sunnis or Druze across the country, some of them are actually being turned away because people fear, once again, that these airstrikes will just follow them.
Heidi Pett in Beirut. Thank you, Heidi. Well, as thousands of people in Lebanon flee as the Israeli offensive intensifies, the majority are heading into Syria. Obeida Hito filed this report from a border crossing southwest of Homs.
As the Israeli bombing campaign on Lebanon intensifies, the humanitarian crisis is growing. Over the last several days, thousands of people have been crossing over from Lebanon into Syria, the vast majority of them Syrian. And we're at one of those border crossings, El Jusia in Homs province. And what you're seeing here is the entrance of the border crossing where hundreds of people are entering every hour today, trying to escape the intensifying bombing campaign in Lebanon. They're entering through the border crossing, which is just in front of you, and then making their way to the administrative offices. There are teams from the United Nations, of various agencies of the UN, as well as other international NGOs, as well as the Syrian government's Ministry for Disasters and Emergency Management. We have been speaking to officials here on the border, and they are telling us they expect the numbers of refugees to increase significantly, especially as the bombing campaign and violence intensify in Lebanon. They also expect that the situation is going to go on for a long time, but they say they're prepared. They have all the resources they need to help people make this a smooth transition back into Syria. Lebanese citizens are also allowed to enter if they meet certain conditions. The Syrian government has also reinforced its military troops in these border areas. There has been an increase in checkpoints as well as security personnel all along the road coming towards this particular border crossing. And it's something the Syrian government Ministry of Defense is saying that is for making sure the situation remains calm and to prevent any kind of incidents from the Lebanese side of the border and even here on the Syrian side of the border. Obaidahito, Al Jazeera, Homs, Syria.
Let's turn to the Gulf nations now. And as we've been reporting, there have been more Iranian strikes across the region. Missiles and drone attacks have taken place in the United Arab Emirates and in Qatar, many of which were intercepted by air defenses. In Bahrain, smoke was seen rising from an oil refinery, which was apparently hit by an Iranian strike. Let's move now to Axel Zaibovich, who joins us from here in Doha. So, Axel, what more can you tell us about the strikes today that took place across the region?
Well, Riley, we're actually getting some updates from Kuwait, where the Kuwaiti army told us they are facing some drones and missiles. So not long ago, we heard that air raid sirens have been sounded across the country, but now we actually seeing a video circulating online that's showing that there's been an explosion and flames rising near Al Salem Air Base south of Kuwait. Well, just a short while ago, we also got an update from the officials there. They say that 212 ballistic missiles were fired and 394 drones. Just to put you a perspective of how big this campaign is targeting Kuwait right now. But we're also hearing from the U.S. State Department in Kuwait. They put up a statement there saying that they are suspending operations inside the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait City. They say that the security of American citizens working abroad is a priority at the moment. But this seems to be part of a wider campaign, a wider pattern of these attacks. We're also seeing that in the United Arab Emirates, 131 drones were fired there, but we also getting reports from officials that 6 people have been injured by falling debris. Also, people in Qatar, they also feeling the consequences of these attacks. Earlier today, we heard loud explosions in the sky above Doha. Very shortly after that, it was followed by another explosions. Officials here in Qatar say that 14 ballistic missiles have been fired from the direction of the Islamic Republic of Iran towards Qatar. But we understand 13 of them were intercepted and 1 fell into the territorial water here in Qatar.
Axel, here in Doha, thank you very much. France's President Emmanuel Macron says the government is ready to send armored vehicles to Lebanon. Macron urged Hezbollah to stop attacking Israel and called on both Israel and Iran to not involve Lebanon further in the war. France has also authorized U.S. forces to use one of its bases on the condition that they are not used to strike Iran. American troops will have temporary access to a base on French territory. And the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced he is sending additional fighter jets to Qatar. He says their purpose is to defend his country's interests and its allies.
When Iran started attacking countries around the Gulf and the wider region, the situation changed. Iran has now fired drones and missiles at 10 countries that did not attack them. These are allies of the UK, where we have hundreds of thousands of British people, as well as British military personnel. Our number one priority is protecting our people.
Markets have been volatile in recent days as investors try to assess the fallout from the conflict. On opening, the major U.S. indices were all down on Thursday. In the United States, stock markets tumbled on Thursday amid renewed concerns about the war with Iran. The price of crude oil continues to rise, now topping $80 a barrel. Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi reports from the New York Stock Exchange.
U.S. markets had a down day on Thursday as oil prices continue to creep higher. All three of the major stock indexes in the United States closed in negative territory, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average down more than 1.5%, nearly 800 points. This is happening as the conflict in the Middle East continues to drag on. Concerns about the impact that the ongoing fighting is having on oil and gas production in Gulf states, as well as transportation through the Strait of Hormuz. All of this is weighing on investors and causing extreme volatility in the marketplace. Rising tech stocks have been one bright spot that have helped keep the markets from plunging too much, but these rising oil prices are getting hard to ignore. We've seen the West Texas Intermediate crude, that is a benchmark oil stock, rise more than 7% just today alone, and that's affecting gas prices in the United States, and it's affecting airlines and cruise lines that require a lot of fuel to serve their customers, and those stocks also dropped on Thursday. The worry is that the longer this conflict continues, the greater impact it will have on markets and, of course, the economy writ large. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
Russia might benefit from higher energy prices caused by the Middle East conflict. Many countries, including those in Asia, get their energy from the Middle East, but they could be forced to turn to Moscow. Dmitry Medvedenko reports from the Russian capital.
Russia is one of the largest oil and gas producers in the world. One huge advantage it has now, it's not in the Middle East. With Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil and gas supplies from the region, Moscow, with its vast resources, seems perfectly poised to step in. Except it can't, at least for now, due to large-scale sanctions imposed on it because of the war in Ukraine.
Russian energy exports have been squeezed by the West, leaving Moscow with just a handful of buyers of its oil, notably China, India, and Turkey, and it's selling at a massive discount. So the jump in oil prices would be beneficial for Russia, but probably not as much as it will likely benefit other exporters like the US. Still, there could be other gains.
Europe has been phasing out Russian energy imports. It's still buying around 13% of its gas from Moscow, but the plan is to drop that to zero by late next year. Norway's energy minister says the EU has been very clear that they want to liberate themselves from Russian oil and gas, but then the events of the last 3-4 days have also been difficult. With the geopolitical situation we see now, I believe the debate will be revived.
Russia's president says it's time to act.
Other markets are opening up, and perhaps it would be more profitable for us to stop supplying the European market right now, to move into those markets that are opening up and establish ourselves there. There is no political motive here. I want that to be clear. But if they are going to close us off in a month or two anyway, then perhaps it is better for us to stop supplies ourselves now.
Kirill Dmitriev, head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, is blaming Europe for what he called short-sighted decisions. He's the one leading talks on removing sanctions imposed on Russia.
The Middle East crisis could end up improving Russia's positions at talks on ending the war in Ukraine and lifting sanctions, now that Europe and other importers may be more interested in seeing Russian resources make a comeback. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Azerbaijan says 4 people have been injured after drones fell near one of its international airports. It happened in the exclave of Nakhchivan. Iran's foreign ministry has denied targeting Azerbaijan, saying it only strikes military bases belonging to its enemies. Azerbaijan blames Iran and says it reserves the right to retaliate.
İran tarafından Azerbaycan
Today, a terrorist act was committed by Iran against the territory of Azerbaijan and the state of Azerbaijan. The territory of the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic came under fire from unmanned aerial vehicles launched by the Iranian state. The targets of the attack were civilian facilities, including the Nakhchivan International Airport and its terminal, a school and other civilian sites, all treacherously struck by Iran. The state of Azerbaijan strongly condemns this heinous terrorist act. Those responsible must be brought to justice without delay.
Let's take a look now at some of the other day's news. U.S. President Donald Trump has fired while Senator Markwayne Mullin takes over as Homeland Security Chief. Al Jazeera's chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher has the latest from Washington.
First of all, there was the real difficulty of 2 days on Capitol Hill this week when she was destroyed under questioning from both Republicans and from Democrats. They were querying her handling of what happened in Minnesota, the death of 2 American citizens that she described initially as domestic terrorists, which proved to be untrue. There was the alleged relationship with one of her special advisors, Corey Lewandowski, who's very close to Donald Trump. There's problems with releasing FEMA funds, particularly to areas hit in North Carolina. But the worst thing that really turned it for her was the fact that her department spent $220 million on a series of promotional videos about the work of the Department of Homeland Security that featured very prominently Kristi Noem herself. Now, under questioning from a Republican senator, she was asked if she got permission from Donald Trump to spend that amount of money because he's trying to rein in costs. And she indicated that they'd had a discussion and this had been approved. It had not, and that really upset Donald Trump. Now, Kristi Noem has been walking on a knife edge for a number of months. This seems to have been the final straw, and Donald Trump announced on Truth Social that she was leaving her job. Markwayne Mullin will be regarded as a safe pair of hands by the White House. He's very close to Donald Trump. The two of them speak quite often. He will be a better administrator in the eyes of those at the White House, and that was the problem, that you needed experience of running an organization like this. And even though Kristi Noem is a former governor of South Dakota, they didn't feel she was doing that job properly. And that was exposed on the hearings in Capitol Hill. Now, Markwayne Mullin, it's not a shoo-in that he will get the job. Donald Trump has said this handover will take place on the 31st of March. He doesn't get to do that. This is a Senate-approved position. So he has got to go through a Senate hearing with a committee chaired by someone who described him as a snake. That's someone who's in his own party. So that doesn't bode particularly well. There are Democrats who want to make sure that Markwayne Mullin will talk about how to change the way ICE operates. If he doesn't deliver, they might not vote for him. So this isn't yet a done deal. Donald Trump would like this to happen quite quickly. No guarantee it's going to go to the timescale that the White House wants.
Millions have turned out to vote for a new parliament in Nepal. It was the first general election since youth-led protests toppled the government last year. Former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli is hoping to stage a political comeback, but he faces competition from a rapper turned politician. Tony Chang reports from Kathmandu.
Tight security in Kathmandu as voting gets underway. Across Nepal, 300,000 additional security personnel have been drafted in. But inside the voting booths, things appear to be going smoothly. These elections weren't supposed to happen for several years, but youth-led protests in September forced the government to step down.
After the Gen Z protest last year, we realized that if we don't vote, there won't be change.
I voted so that I can have a meal cooked by my mother at home, and so that young people like me don't have to apply for jobs abroad.
Elsewhere in the capital, the interim Prime Minister cast her vote. These elections mark the end of a caretaker administration designed to deliver a free and fair poll. And waiting in the wings, the man who could take her place. Balendra Shah, a former rapper and mayor of Kathmandu. Much of the campaigning happened on social media, and traditional parties struggled to adapt. But this enigmatic celebrity appears to have caught voters' imagination. With polling stations across this mountainous Himalayan nation, it'll take days to count the ballots. But indications of a winner should be known within 24 to 48 hours. And that could be an ominous sign for established political powers. Nepal is a country rooted in tradition, but there's also a feeling here that those traditions aren't really working. It's what forced tens of thousands of people out onto the streets to protest 6 months ago, and what's forcing millions of people out of the country to earn a living. And it's that desire for change that's pushing them towards the polls today. Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
Inside Story is next.
Weakened but defiant, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel as it pummels southern Lebanon and parts of Beirut. That's despite the Lebanese government's ban on Hezbollah's military activities. What will be the fallout for Lebanon? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Lebanon is once again drawn into a war many of its leaders say is not their fight. Against the government's warnings, Hezbollah has joined Iran in its conflict with Israel. The armed group says it has a right to respond as part of what it calls a resistance campaign. But this time, the Lebanese government has responded by taking the decision to ban Hezbollah's military activities and demanding it disarm. The group has not heeded that warning. Now, as the war between the US, Israel and Iran widens to Lebanon, can Hezbollah's involvement be of any real help to Tehran? And what price will Lebanon pay as a result? We'll talk to our panel of guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Israeli airstrikes once again rain down on Beirut and batter South Lebanon. And fire rages in the town Tia after Israeli forces hit an electricity facility. Israel has issued evacuation orders telling residents to move north of the Litani River. So far, more than 83,000 people from the south of Lebanon and southern Beirut have been displaced. Many are now sleeping in shelters and relying on aid to survive. Israel has been pummeling Lebanon near daily, despite a ceasefire with Hezbollah in November 2024. But this current escalation began after Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets on northern Israel on Monday, in support of its main backer and weapons supplier Iran, after joint Israeli-US strikes killed its supreme leader.
Hezbollah and its Islamic resistance are responding to the Israeli-American aggression, and this is a legitimate right. They wanted a battle in which they reached the furthest limits, but our choice is to confront it until the ultimate sacrifice, and we will not surrender.
Israel has pushed further into Lebanese sovereign territory and says it has troops on the ground.
Northern Command has moved forward and is creating a buffer, as promised, between residents and any potential threat.
But historically, Hezbollah has had some success in ground wars, and analysts say the group may see this as an advantage. Hezbollah was created in 1982 to fight the Israeli occupation of the south, supported by Iran. The group declared victory in 2000 after Israel withdrew from the area. In Lebanon's sectarian political landscape, they have been one of the major representatives of the Shia population in government and provide them with basic services such as schools and hospitals. But many Lebanese people say they act as a state within a state. The Prime Minister has called on Hezbollah to stop its military operations.
The Lebanese state declares its absolute rejection of any military actions launched from the Lebanese territory outside the framework of its legitimate institutions. It affirms that the decision of war and peace is exclusively in its hands, which necessitates the immediate prohibition of all Hezbollah security and military activities as being outside the law and obliging it to hand over its weapons to the Lebanese state.
The November 2024 ceasefire terms included Hezbollah's disarmament, which had begun. The deal came after the group suffered huge losses to Israel during the war that began in October 2023. including the killing of its leader Hassan Nasrallah. And because of that, Hezbollah seems to consider this fight with Israel to be an existential one. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this further with our panel of guests who are joining us today on Inside Story. And in Beirut, we have Heiko Wimmen, the project director for Iraq, Syria and Lebanon at the International Crisis Group. Nimrod Novik is in Tel Aviv, a member of the leadership of Commanders for Israel's Security. He served as a senior policy advisor to the former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. And in Washington, D.C., Nabil Khoury, a former US diplomat and non-resident fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Let me start with you, Heiko, because you are there on the ground in the place where, in recent days, bombs have been falling. What is your assessment of why Hezbollah decided to take the action it did after the death of the Ayatollah?
Well, I would say I take them at their word. They said right after the attack in the first statement that this was to avenge Khamenei, and like kind of tacked on at the end of that statement was and the defense of Lebanon, which is I would say is a nod to the fact that burning Lebanon on the altar of Iranian interest, as you could put it, is not something that is very popular in Lebanon, including perhaps within the bases, the grassroots support of Hezbollah. So it was certainly that motivation. It was the motivation to join Iran, to join the, let's say, the center of the axis of resistance in this fight. And then we can discuss whether that was an order from Tehran or whether the people here did that on their own accord. But this seems to be the central motivation.
So, Nabil, one of the reasons I'm asking that question is to rewind till last year, June of last year, during the war then, the war that lasted 12 days. Israel attacked Iran, then joined in by the US. Of course, we didn't know that that was going to be just 12 days at the time. It could have gone on much longer. Hezbollah, on that occasion, its guns remained silent. What's the difference, do you think?
I think it's partially the assassination of Khamenei, but it all goes back to Gaza. People must understand that the sentiment for the Palestinians and the mass murder that they underwent in Gaza resonates deeply with a lot of peoples in Fertile Crescent countries, not just in Lebanon. And Hezbollah took a serious beating from the two-year war. So it's been laying low, and it's been very patient since the ceasefire about a year ago. They have been quiet, but Israel has been engaged in daily bombardment all over Lebanon. So at some point, patience runs out, and you put all the factors together. And therefore, they retaliate.
OK, I want to come to Nimrod in a moment in Tel Aviv about the Israeli response. But first, back to you, Heiko, because I think it's worth adding, is it not, that Hezbollah had, on a political level, we're told, reassured other politicians, as we'd seen those forces arriving, those US forces, that armada of forces arriving, that it wasn't going to be dragged in. Does it suggest to you that perhaps there is some division within their ranks?
Very good question. I mean, so we hear that they gave these guarantees, if you want to call it that. And there have been reports suggesting that there was something of a rebellion, perhaps of parts of the military wing, if that's the right word, against the political leadership about this stance of not engaging. I don't think anybody is in a position to come to a judgment on that. I mean, what exactly goes on in the decision-making processes inside the party, what role perhaps Iranian cadres have at this point, it's pretty much a black box, to me at least. I don't have a lamp to really shine light into that. I would also say at this point it perhaps doesn't matter anymore, because here we are. Hezbollah has joined the Iranian war effort, so to speak. And just to add to the question or to the answer of Nabil, I think one difference between June and now is June 25 and now is that in June 25, I would say that Iran was looking for a calibrated response to the attack. Right now, they're hitting everywhere they can with everything they have. So that perhaps is also a difference. And Hezbollah is just one of the things they have. So use it, even if it may not move the needle much.
Nimrod in Tel Aviv, we saw a very quick, devastating response from the Israeli side. Was this just a response, or was the Hezbollah attack a pretext, a good excuse for something that Israel already planned? Because the attack on Iran by the US and Israel was done at a time of their choosing. Had they always planned when that was going to happen, they were going to hit Lebanon and hit Hezbollah too?
Yes, I think you're right. It was an opportunity that Hezbollah provided Israel with. I think that Nabil was right in referencing Gaza in this context, but from an Israeli perspective, it's a different dimension. Since October 7th, 23, something quite substantial has changed in the Israeli mindset, security and otherwise, and that is a lesson learned until adversaries strike, and not to count on our appreciation, understanding of intentions, but rather focus on capabilities. And the pendulum, in my judgment, has swung too far in the other direction, whereas there is a sentiment that if we can, we should. And I think that militarily, I don't think there is doubt that we have the capabilities to deal with multiple adversaries, but what is missing, in my judgment, is the diplomatic leg.
Nimrod, what do you think Israel actually wants? Does it want a stable Lebanon, or does it want a weak, fragile country there?
I think that since the emergence of the current government in Lebanon, the Israeli mindset on this issue has changed. And I think that the concern that Hezbollah was driving everything for decades was replaced with an appreciation that there is a government we can work with, even if it is reluctant to negotiate directly and it has to be via Washington or other mediators. Nonetheless, there is a great appreciation for the courage and resolve of the current government. There are doubts about capabilities, and that's where perhaps diplomacy and other instruments should kick in. But yeah, I think Israel wants a stable Lebanon where Hezbollah might remain as a political force for sure, but is not threatening, neither Hezbollah nor anybody else threatens our civilian population.
Nabil, talk there of the new rulers, the new leaders in Lebanon, because you do have a new top team, a new Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, who has been an international judge and an ambassador, and a new president, Joseph Aoun. They have also taken a new approach, a very different approach now that conflict has broken out, saying that Hezbollah needs to stop all military activities. Are you surprised by how bold their approach is, and are you worried about where it could lead, though?
Well, I'm not surprised. There's a lot of pressure on them from Washington and from Tel Aviv, but their words have not really been translated into any kind of wise action. And I'm thinking of diplomacy here. There are many analysts in Israel as well as in Washington who understand full well that the Lebanese state, the Lebanese army, does not have the capability to disarm Hezbollah and does not have the political will to do so, knowing also that if they did, another civil war would break out in Lebanon. The problem is that the political appointees, the government, the decision makers in Israel and Washington don't understand or refuse to understand, and they don't care if they push Lebanon towards another civil war. So the question here is, the new government wants to have the exclusive right to decide war and peace. Fine, everybody agrees in principle to that, but the Lebanese state has historically failed to do either. They've never defended the border of Lebanon, and they've never used diplomacy effectively enough, first of all, internally, to agree on a national defense strategy that all Lebanese would agree to, and then use its contacts in the West to help bring about peace, and to begin with, stop the daily harassment by Israeli forces.
Heiko, I mean, the big question, or one of the big questions here, is what has Hezbollah got now? What are their capabilities? What is their weaponry? How many missiles have they got left? And that remains a very unanswered question because we don't know how damaged they were in the last war, 2023 to 2024. What's your assessment?
I mean, well, for that, you should probably ask our friends in the Israeli military intelligence or think tanks that speak on their behalf. I don't know. I simply don't have no way of knowing. No access to this information. But I think what we see is that there are residual capacities. There is residual capabilities. They can shoot missiles, smaller salvos. They can fly drones. It doesn't seem to be much compared to where they were a year and a half ago, basically before the big Israeli strikes were launched and before the campaign really got serious. But it's still enough to create a nuisance, at least in the northern Israel. It's still enough to send people to the bunkers. It's still enough to give Israel a pretext to say we have to occupy a buffer zone up to the Litani, up to the Awali. We'll see how far they want to go, right? So that capacity is clearly there, and that is important because it suggests that structures of command and control and logistics and communication do work. Even though we still have apparently near complete intelligence penetration by the Israelis. I mean, the way that they do pinpointed attacks on Hezbollah personnel or Iranians clearly indicates that. And this also means if they can do that, if they can coordinate enough and efficiently to actually attack the Israelis under fire, under this kind of pressure, with this kind of intelligence penetration, then they surely can also mount a coherent military response if anybody comes domestically in Lebanon, the Lebanese army, for instance, comes after them and their weapons. And I think this is very important to realize and keep in mind. I mean, there have been suggestions that they're non-existent, that they're completely destroyed, that there's no way of pushing back. If the army would only push once, so to speak, this whole structure would be collapsed like a house of cards. They would be shown like in class. It would look like a Wizard of Oz. I think after these few days, I don't think anybody would propose that anymore. And if he or she does, it's reckless.
Nimrod, let me ask you the same question about the strength of Hezbollah. I know you are no longer plugged into all the secret Israeli intelligence, but you are very plugged into what's being said there in Israel. How strong do people think Hezbollah is? And let me add another part of the question. Also, how strong is Hezbollah's leadership? Because Hassan Nasrallah was killed in the last war. Naim Qassem, many observers say, is no Hassan Nasrallah.
Yeah, I think the sentiment in Israel, you reflected it accurately in terms of the leadership quality, the charisma, the command and control, etc. The perception here, at least in the public domain, I have to be careful, is that Hezbollah has residual capacity to cause considerable damage. They have not used the few dozen longer range missiles that they do have. They used only short-term ones, short-range ones, as well as a few drones. In both categories, in all three categories, they still have residual capacity. I believe that the Israeli security forces are capable, both due to the intelligence penetration that was mentioned and due to other capabilities, is capable of further eroding the capacity of Hezbollah, and I expect that to happen in the coming days. I respectively dispute the assumption that in Jerusalem we don't care or even wish to see a civil war in Lebanon. I believe that is not true. I think we would like to see a stable Lebanon, but in the equation between eroding further Hezbollah capabilities and just sitting by and expecting it to launch at will, we are not going to sit back and just watch it.
Nabil, we've heard lots of talk with regard to the wider war, the US and Israel against Iran, that this is existential for Iran. Is this existential for Hezbollah too? Do they think they're fighting their last war here?
I think this is certainly one of the reasons that caused them to react when they did, is that Israeli daily bombardments have been reaching, as Haikal said, sensitive areas. Their intelligence has been very good. And therefore, in addition to decimating a large part of the leadership of Hezbollah, they've certainly degraded Hezbollah's firepower. And at some point, the feeling in Hezbollah leadership is, if we don't react now, we will lose the ability to react, period. And so they jumped into the fray. And again, they're banking here on Israeli society tiring from this war and Donald Trump tiring from the economic cost, which is huge, which will ultimately affect the average consumer in the US and therefore the average voter. So he may stand to lose a lot of votes in the upcoming elections. So this was a gamble on Hezbollah's part, but in the end, they do have a fight still in them, certainly with Israel, but I think more importantly internally. If there is a confrontation with the Aliyah, which I doubt very much that it will come to that, but if there is a kind of a mini civil war in Lebanon, different weapons, we're not talking about long-range rockets anymore, we're talking about small arms and hand-to-hand, and in that area, Hezbollah is still very strong. So they're still a factor.
Heiko, you are there in Beirut. The Lebanese people have suffered so much over so long. I want to focus on them for a moment. Very resilient, used to real hardship and very weak government. But, you know, we had the war from 2023 to 2024. Before that, financial collapse, the port blast. I mean, how tough is this for ordinary people there in Lebanon right now? I hear the figures of displaced have now gone up to 90,000.
Yes. Look, I mean, it's very different depending on where you sit. You know, of course, I mean, it's a strain and the drain on everybody. Well, I mean, my kid is out of school, right? I mean, I think twice and three times where I move. Yesterday, like somebody was coming and she was lucky, but an hour after she reached home, like a relative of mine, so 4 people were killed on the airport road. You know, that affects everybody. But we really need to talk about the displaced. You know, so the displaced, it's now 90,000. There have been displacement orders for all Lebanon south of the Litani, which includes Sur, Tyre, city of about 200,000, you know, I mean, if you take these orders literally, these people all have to leave. Today, there was a displacement order for all of Dahi, which is half of the metropolitan population of Beirut, 1 million people perhaps. If only 20% of these people flee, there's going to be complete chaos and mayhem, you know, and these people have no shelters. There is no government. The government is completely, I mean, cannot respond to this. I mean, it would be foolish to blame them. Nobody can respond to this. These people, many of them are displaced for the second time now, you know, and Hezbollah has, for all we know, no capabilities to help these people at this point. It's going to be, I mean, a disaster, humanitarian disaster of, I think, for this country, unprecedented size.
Okay.
And there's a potential.
Let me just bring in Nimrod, if I may.